Hello, everybody, and welcome to session 4 of Welcoming Newcomer Families. This is our FCSN's 10-hour series that we're launching, and we're hoping to do more of in the future if it's helpful for folks on how to welcome newcomer families, introducing a couple of frameworks that might be useful for folks, some strategies, and also just creating an interactive space for folks to get to know each other, network. I see a couple of familiar faces or names. So we've definitely been doing that in the past couple of sessions, as well as get together to just generally discuss what's going on in your districts. How can we help? What resources are we missing? And how everybody is feeling about it. This session, we are talking about creating and maintaining an inclusive climate. This is something that we've been building up towards for the last 3 sessions. Before this, we talked about firstly getting to know families, what that looks like, where our newcomer families are coming from, introducing where to find public records on a couple of demographics and statistics that might be helpful for folks in terms of understanding the process of how refugees, other types of immigrant identities are coming into Massachusetts, and how that really relates back to the work that we're doing together. In our second session, we went over accessing resources such as basic needs. We went over for most of that session how to look over FCSN's LMS website on accessing basic needs, records, and how to utilize social media widgets so that we can speak to each other and ask questions, get responses, and such. I'll be going over that a little bit later for those that are new to the conversation. In our third session, which was on Tuesday this week, we went over how partnering with communities look like, especially when we're speaking about newcomer families and we're speaking with newcomer families, and what that means for language and accessibility. And that all brings us to today. A couple of housekeeping things that I wanted to point out before we began the actual content for today is that firstly, all of our past sessions are now on YouTube. Hooray. I've sent the links to folks that have registered for this webinar. If you have hopped onto this webinar and you find that you did not receive any of these emails or these links, please feel free to DM me through the Zoom or to email me. My email is in the incoming slide so that I can get you settled into the mailing list for this. But it's very exciting. The link for this session will be emailed again to you today during our recap, as well as the handouts I'll be using for PDP credits, so that everything is just consolidated in one space. Secondly, speaking of handouts, everything is up to this point pretty much complete. I will send folks the 4th handout. Wasn't sure if everybody found that helpful if I sent it to you ahead of time. But I will also be uploading it through the chat as a PDF format today, a little bit afterwards, so that folks can use it as well during our asynchronous work time. But so far, I received a couple of questions, like just to clarify on how many handouts there are and where we can access them. All of the handouts that we've had so far, there are 3 of them, have been sent to folks in emails. But for this coming recap email for session 4, I'll send all handouts at the same time so that you can just double check if you've downloaded one and maybe not the other. So currently we are on our 3rd handout. Session 1 and session 2 from the first week of doing this, the handouts were put in together. This is because during session 1, we frankly had so much information to say that we ran out of time for asynchronous work time. So we're merging session 1 and session 2's handouts together. Session 3 on Tuesday has its own handout, and session 4 has another one. We'll be doing the final handout for session 5 together on the next coming Tuesday. So stay tuned for that, and I'll be sending that ahead of time so that everybody gets everything together. But speaking of what the handouts are meant to do, this is for PDP credits. So again, if folks are coming into the session and are interested in that, feel free to just shoot me another email and I can get everybody situated. But this is a 10-hour series for PDP credits. Because this is in the afternoon and we recognize that definitely there's a lot of things going on for folks in the school districts in the afternoon, such as dismissal and We're doing a half-hour asynchronous work block so that folks can get to work on the handouts, really personalize this experience and this webinar for everybody, just because every district has a different situation going on. And then once all of them are completed, feel free to send them over to me, and then I can make sure that you're checked off for PDP. Last thing that I wanted to emphasize is, again, our last session is on Tuesday, March 12th. Let everybody that you think might be helpful, that this might be helpful for know. This upcoming session, session 5, is really just like a combination of everything that we've been going over in the last 4 sessions. It's going to be a space for us to interact and utilize the belonging diagram, personalize it for both short-term and long-term planning. I'll be introducing a couple of frameworks that might be useful for folks in terms of planning out how they would like to welcome newcomer families, identify where they are in the process, and really define what short-term and long planning means in your context. To say a little bit more about that right now, short-term planning is really a preventative, a reactive strategy. So thinking of the newcomer families that you already have in your fold, what can you do? What can you do for families right now? What that looks like for folks, and how can you alter any existing strategies you have to better accommodate those that are coming in. In terms of long-term strategies, it really means how to sustain um, what you're working on right now, so that in the future, when folks, different types of newcomer families and different identities come into your districts, how to really create a framework that makes sure that you don't have to, make up new strategies again or think about what to do, that everything is really mostly set there for you so that there's more flexibility in how you welcome new families into your schools and districts. So I am more than happy to say more about that in the future, but in terms of time, we only have an hour and a half of content. So let's move on. But that is everything that I had to say about housekeeping. Okay. So to begin again, I wanted to introduce myself to anybody that is new to this session. My name is Ann Tang. I am a senior trainer and family engagement manager at the Federation for Children with Special Needs. You'll see a picture of me on the screen with a blue background. I have glasses, I have medium-ish black hair, and my background is currently blurred. My email is also on the slide that you can see before you. So if you want to just take a note of that right now and send me an email about anything that you think of in this coming session, feel free to do so. But just to give everybody a one-liner on what FCSN does, we are an umbrella organization that work with school districts and families on family engagement, empowerment, and advocacy. Our focus includes children with disabilities, but we have since branched out on family engagement to include folks in marginalized communities, multilingual speakers, and newcomer families, and that's where my work comes in. On the slide, you'll also see a block for introductions. I would love to hear from anybody that both old and new about your name and title, firstly, secondly, your school district and community, thirdly, your experience with newcomers, and as just generally a fun icebreaker. I don't know if it's fun. I think it's fun. But just generally, I would love to know. I realize that I haven't actually asked this yet in the last 4 sessions, but how many newcomer families? Just give me a rough estimate. It does not have to be complete. Are you welcoming to your school or your district? Just you can put these numbers in the chat. You can introduce yourself in the chat as well, but I'm going to stop talking and to open the space up for folks to introduce themselves, also verbally as well.
Hi, my name is Jessie. I am a social worker. I work for Effective School Solutions, but we are in Davis Elementary in Bedford Public Schools. And I am here with Christine, and we work together. So I'm a clinician and she is a mental health technician. Um, and we are working with newcomers who currently live at the Bedford Plaza Hotel.
Hi, Jesse. Thank you for being here today. And thank you for just describing what you do and your work. Um, just curious, like, can you give us a rough estimate of how many folks you work with from that area alone?
So, within our program, so we actually just started in the school this week. And so we are working with 6 families. Our caseloads are small, so I think it can go
Mhm,
up to 10 families. But
mhm.
in terms of the number of families in the hotel, I think I've heard a number of around like 60 families or so.
It's
Um,
a lot of folks.
mhm.
Yeah, I heard it. Hmm.
Yeah, and the families are from different areas as well.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a big load of work to do. So kudos to you and thank you for sharing. It's so nice to see you here today. See a couple of things in the chat. Couple people saying hi. Brittany from Medfield, Joan from Malden, few hundred newcomers this school year, 5 or fewer families. It's looking like folks that are entering today's conversation are really experiencing a very diverse range in terms of numbers. And I've heard from a lot of feedback in our community practices that this is really where the difficulty lies in, that folks, because are experiencing such different situations, it's hard to find strategies through resources that really work for everybody. Hopefully, this conversation is going to help a little bit in terms of thinking about how to personalize strategies. And hopefully, so will session 5 as well. But thank you all for being here and sharing your stories. It's so helpful for me also to hear. Um, and I realized that I haven't done this much in the last couple of sessions. I might have alluded to it once or twice, but I also like to share my own background and why this work is meaningful to me. Um, I am, I identify as an immigrant myself. I've held a lot of different types of immigrant identities in the last couple years and decades. I have previously held a green card. I was previously a first and also second gen immigrant, depending on where you're talking about my background and how I moved around. Currently, I am an F1 visa holder, and there's a lot more to the table for me personally coming in. So I have some backgrounds in terms of understanding this immigrant and this immigration process. And hopefully my experiences will help with aligning this work and how our conversations go. So if you have any questions about my personal experience as well, feel free to also just message me. I am bilingual as well, so knowing a lot of this content is going to be about language and culture. A lot of this is also my lived experience. I see one more comment. I'm just looking at my other screen. Hello, Claudia, a small school in Roxbury. A few newcomers to our school thus far. Jazz, hello again, is an education advocate in Worcester County. Clients throughout central and western Massachusetts. 20 to 60 intake calls a day with newcomer families. Unfortunately, not all of them become full-time clients. I think that is what I often hear as well when I'm working with families one-on-one. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Please feel free to keep on sharing more about yourself, the work that you do, the numbers that you see coming in throughout this conversation. I'll be trying my best to check the chat intermittently to see if there's anything that we can read out loud. If you would like for me not to read something out loud, please note so in the comments so that I don't do it. Just because we are recording, so if anybody feels like they would like to say something but not have it be recorded, totally okay. I'll just not read it out loud. But otherwise, I will be attempting my very best to make this as visually accessible as possible. So I will also be describing the slides. If you see me lacking, please feel free to call me out and I will describe it again for the recording. Okay, let's begin and talk about our agenda today. We're going to firstly do a very quick review on our newcomer online forum for those that are just joining the conversation, as well as going through a brief glossary of terms, as well as ideas that we went through in the last three sessions. We're then going to move on to a discussion on inclusivity and family engagement, what that means. And we're going to have a couple of definitions out there for folks. We're then going to break down what family needs and school needs look like, regroup, and talk about current trends. And this is where we're going to be really utilizing the interactive elements of this session. And that's probably where we're going to stop recording for a bit. We're going to come back and talk about creating inclusive climates, and then lastly, finish off with utilizing strategies and seeking community partnerships. As I mentioned before, this is a 2-hour session from 1 to 3, but the first 1.5 hours will be for recorded content. The last half hour will be asynchronous work time. It's also going to be a space for folks to ask questions, connect with each other. And speaking of connections, feel free to also intermittently put down your contact info if you'd like to follow up with anybody or offer any resources that you find are helpful in the chat below. Anything helps. And this space is also really just for us to become familiar with each other and form a community. So moving onwards, I don't think I have any other, yep, I don't have any other points to make about this. That's about it. I'm going to move onwards to this diagram. Folks have seen this diagram if you've been in all 4 sessions by this point many times, but emphasizing this is really key and crucial to understanding and relating the information that we're reviewing in this content back to our school districts. So for folks that are new to this session, before you is a slide titled Discussion Review and Online Forum. You will see a 4-way Venn diagram. Feel free to screenshot it. It will probably appear again and again in our topic and conversation, but we call this our belonging diagram. And this is important because it emphasizes the 4 milestones that are necessary in creating intersectional and inclusive belonging. We're going to look at it from a clockwise motion. On the very top, you'll find in the red circle, understanding context within ideas with a light bulb icon. In terms of understanding context, this is what we talked about in session 1. This was, really getting to know legal protection, informing ourselves of immigration backgrounds, defining what newcomer is, um, looking through a couple of pretty standard terms and identities that folks use to identify newcomer families and for newcomer families to identify themselves, and knowing generally what the refugee resettlement process looks like, and how, just understanding that every newcomer family's background is very different. So their needs may also be very diverse as well, depending on what district and what sorts of communities and demographics you work with. Moving clockwise downwards, you'll find a yellow circle accessing basic needs with a house icon. This alludes to resources such as healthcare, understanding the educational system, food security, as well as any other basic needs that multilingual learners might need to access, such as English learning resources. Um, we talked about this in the second session, and that's when we introduced our online forum, Welcoming Newcomer Families, same title as our 10-hour series, through the LMS Learn World. It is hyperlinked to this slide. So once we are done with this presentation and I send a recap to folks, you can go through the slides, click on any of these links, and you will be able to access Learn Worlds, any other stats that you want to see, all the Google Jamboards and such. So that is a website that we're hoping that folks attending this and also throughout our series this year in breaking down communication with newcomer families will be able to utilize. It's mainly an online forum to let folks interact with each other, share resources, share images, links, and stuff. As well as a space for consolidated resources. So if you look at the website and you see any resources that are missing that you think should be there, let us know and we will definitely put it back on. It is a work in progress. None of these lists are exhaustive. It's going to keep changing. It's going to be added onto at various points throughout this whole year. We just launched it last week, so keep that in mind, and we'll be going over that a little bit if we have time later. But of course, for the sake of time, we're going to keep moving onwards. Again, clockwise motion, you will see the icon with two people speaking to each other, and that milestone is respecting language and culture. This is what we're going to go over today in session 4. Um, and the last milestone that is in the green circle to the very left with the handshake icon is partnering with communities. We went through this in our session 3 contents on some strategies that folks may identify with in terms of what efforts have been made to partner with communities, what community partnership looks like in the context of newcomer families, who can we partner with in the community, and we went through a brief discussion of what that looks like for everybody. So on this diagram, you will also see arrows pointing towards the intersections. This is to remind us that all of these milestones are interactive, and that folks can pinpoint where they are on the belonging diagram at any point, but also not just pinpoint one location, but perhaps multiple. For example, if you're welcoming a set of newcomer families, um, and you are in the middle of accessing basic needs and partnering with communities, that's really where you're at on this diagram, but also it's specifically not numbered to make sure that we recognize that there is a flow to how we utilize all of the milestones here, but that it is the priority list here is not exhaustive. It's not necessary that you have to understand context before you access basic needs. It's not that you have to partner with communities before you respect language and culture. Everything can be done at the same time. It really depends on your situation, how your school system is monitoring the in and out and the flow of families coming in. So that was a brief overview of what the belonging diagram is, as well as explaining generally what the online forum is. For folks that are curious, again, I can go over it later as well, but I am going to move on from this slide. Feel free, again, if I'm going over this a little fast, to type in any questions in the chat, and then I can explain them while we finish the rest of this review. In our last session, we talked briefly about the intersection of community and school engagement and what that means in order to move from involvement from families to engagement with families. We gave a couple of examples in this chart of what that looks like. On the left, you'll see a column titled Family Involvement. On the right, you will see a column titled Family Engagement. For example, instead of doing something for the families, doing something with the families in terms of events that welcome newcomer families into the fold, involving parents and involving community partners such as local institutions, faith-based institutions that a lot of communities often utilize, or cultural centers are a really great way to do so. Um, we went through this already, so I'm not going to do it again, but this is here for you if you would like to screenshot this, so you can look at it again while we go over the rest of the slides. Something that we did not have a lot of time to talk about last time is this slide. It is titled Partnerships and Newcomer Engagement, and it leaves you 9 tips and strategies to do so with community partnership in mind. This is also going to be important, and it's also going to lay a foundation for how we think about respecting language and culture, as well as promoting an inclusive cultural climate. So I'm going to go through this one more time, because when we put this up last time, it was mainly for folks to think about while they were completing their worksheets during asynchronous work time. So the first one that we mentioned before is identifying potential partners, followed by understanding community needs, establishing trust, developing clear objectives, which leads to a space for collaborative planning and resource sharing. A lot of these you can identify in the different milestones that we've talked about. And we can dive in deep later into how this can be personalized for your own districts. Moving onwards to the second column to the right, you'll see implementing joint programs, and this can mean anything from language classes that I know a lot of districts and folks are already doing, which is awesome. Mentorship. Last time we talked about somebody had brought up that a really great idea about really including students and families into the community is doing a buddy program. This can be like a peer buddy for families as well as peer buddies for students, as well as cultural orientation. And the last time as well, some folks have brought up that it's not only just to help folks assimilate and understand um, the structures of our state's educational system, but also how we can relate to families and utilize resources such as cultural brokers, translators, and interpreters to really orient ourselves into the discussion that a lot of communities are already having within their own languages, within their own demographics, and within their own communities, what that looks like to really prioritize a bilingual aspect to the work that we do because a lot of our newcomer families are multilingual, um, and how to address the differences between folks that already have, a brief basic understanding and foundation of English versus folks that are just coming in and may not have family members in the country, regardless of whether they're immigrants or not, to support them during this process. Below that, you will see the point promoting communication and engagement. We'll be talking more about this in session 5 as well, how to integrate this into short and long-term planning. And lastly, to evaluate and adapt. We have not mentioned this yet, just purely because we ran out of time, but something that we really want to emphasize for folks is that we never really should just aim for perfection, but really for continuity. Um, a lot of feedback that I receive from families from working with them that it's not really that there aren't resources out there. There are a lot of resources out there, but in terms of building connections, building relationships, and establishing trust, there needs to be a continuous effort to reach out to families and not a one done and all deal. And that's really what we're trying to do. It's okay to aim for 80% perfection instead of 100% perfection, but just having the efforts being consistent is going to be huge, not just for our families, but also for us in terms of how we establish a systemic way to welcome families into our systems. I'm going to stop here and see if folks have any questions. I just blurbed a lot of information out to you. And also to take a brief water break. Okay, I think we're doing all right. So I'm going to move on to our topic of today, inclusivity and family engagement. We have finished the review part of our session today. If you'd like to learn more, please feel free to let me know, but I'll be introducing the online forum a little bit later during the asynchronous work time if folks would like to learn more about it. So I'll be opening up a different meeting room just to talk about this, just to let everybody know. But let's talk a little bit more about what inclusivity and family engagement mean in terms of respecting language and culture. So why are we bringing up inclusivity as a key term? It creates a welcoming and supportive environment for all students and families. And why is family engagement a key term in the session topic and also in the work that we do? We talked a lot about family engagement already. We went through it pretty exclusively during our last session. We'll be talking more about it in incoming webinars in April and May as well. But for this context, it develops collaboration between families and schools to support student learning and development. Research has shown us the benefits to really utilize and promote family engagement throughout districts as a key way to increase student success. Um, and in our case, not only to increase student success, but also to increase family communication and really create a fluent flow for integration to be possible into communities, not just their own. Some examples that I wanted to point out before I move on to the next slide, though, is that there are a couple effective family engagement practices that we've spoken of, mostly in passing, though, throughout the last couple of sessions. Some include home visits, family workshops, parent-teacher conferences. A lot of folks also described other strategies that they've been utilizing, such as making multilingual phone calls, really making sure that robocalls are available in different languages, or petitioning for the school system to really make that change, utilizing this in your classrooms, creating spaces for folks to become welcome, such as really, emphasizing that their cultures and their languages are respected and appreciated in their classrooms, as well as making sure to take note of any fears that families may have because they are newcomer families and because they may hold um, non-legal or refugee statuses, and because they may not always have all of their official paperwork on them. Um, some couple of other strategies that we talked about in terms of promoting family engagement include being culturally sustainable in terms of how we communicate. Really thinking about some fears that families may have while communicating with schools is a really good way to start as well. So all of that we've said above and before relates back to the 5 bullet points that you see on the screen. All of this is important context in order to be able to really think holistically and intersectionally about how we interact with families. The first one, as always, points back to understanding context, what that means, how do we define things, both from our perspective and our family's perspective, how to make sure that everybody is on the same page, as well as knowing the processes that families go through so that we have a fuller understanding of where they're coming from. Below that, you'll see the bullet point leveling power dynamics. I've emphasized this again and again in a lot of our different sessions, but really understanding the power dynamics that we see and also the ones that we may not see in our interactions with families. Um, do they fear interactions with us, or are they hesitant about having interactions that may give back to the educational system? Understanding how the lack of information that some families may be facing, a lot of the times due to lack of language access, may also impact how the power dynamics between us play out. And this naturally goes down into the third bullet point of building trust, what that looks like in terms of utilizing a relational approach to how we view our relationships with our families, how to utilize an asset-based mindset, and how to really think about the work that we do with addressing the wealth first of information that we already have instead of just what we are lacking, and utilizing partnerships within our communities to build that trust, so that instead of two-way communication, there is a three-way recognition of the power between ourselves, the families we are reaching, and the community. To the right column, you will see the last 2 bullet points, cultural brokering, that which I will be explaining the definition of in further detail in a later slide, as well as translanguaging, which is a concept that we talked about in sessions 2 and 3, that we explained a little bit more of in 3. But to give a brief recap on what translanguaging is, this is the act of really thinking about how to effectively and strategically communicate multilingually. So this can mean cultural brokering, this can mean translations and interpretations, but on a broader aspect of what translanguaging means, it is to utilize and encourage the act of being bilingual and to really focus and emphasize on a bilingual mindset, For example, if you have a student that is from a newcomer family that utilizes Spanish as their primary language, perhaps encouraging the students to speak in both English and Spanish at the same time instead of having context being taught in one language translated to the other, and really using them both to really get across the point that they are trying to make and the context instead of just the language itself. So now that we have gone through a couple of bullet points on what inclusivity and family engagement can mean and how we interact with families, as well as a couple of suggestions on strategies to newcomer engagement and partnerships, I would really love to ask folks today in our session the following question on the slide below, bolded. What words come to mind when we are thinking about inclusivity? It can be any of the words that we've talked about prior. It could be something new that you're experiencing in your school district. But I'm going to go quiet now and open the floor up for folks both to put in the chat and also to speak currently out loud to everybody here. What words come to mind when we are thinking about inclusivity? Thank you, Brittany. Brittany says a feeling of belonging. I completely agree. I like to use inclusivity instead of inclusion. I think it's a bit of a more active term. And I think it fosters more of a sense of belonging as well. So I'm definitely with you there. Is there anybody else that would like to share anything else in the comments? Okay, I see a couple. Claudia says feeling welcome. Jeanette says equal access, definitely. And aside from equal access, I think also that really goes back to leveling power dynamics, what information is out there and who can access it, and how accessibility plays a very big role in family engagements. Jazz says policy, inclusivity rarely happens on its own. Definitely agree with that. Policy and understanding what systemic protections families have within the educational system, the health system. It's going to be really huge, not only for our understanding, but also for them to understand their own rights. Wow, those were a lot of really great terms. Thank you all for participating. Feel free to put in more while we're speaking as well. This is really, really great content. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. So let's think about inclusivity and family engagement more specifically in terms of what directions for growth are out there for folks. These are a couple of bullet points that are going to be helpful in terms of our conversation today for inclusivity and family engagement regards specifically to newcomer families. All of these concepts that I'm going to go through can be found in the book. I just want to promote this again because it's such a great book, Humanizing Education for Immigrant and Refugee Youth, 20 Strategies for the Classroom and Beyond. I can send this link for folks if you would like to learn more about it. But it's a really, really great resource for educators and for professionals within this field. It's written by Bonisha Bajaj, Daniel Walsh, Leslie Bartlett, and Gabriela Martinez. It highlights a couple of strategies that we're going to be using later today, as well as a myriad of strategies that we talked about in session 3. It goes over a lot of really great resources and research for folks to look at that really provide excellent frameworks in terms of how to humanize education for immigrant youth, in particular newcomer families and refugee youth. So after I put that promo out there, I'm going to start going over the bullet points that we're seeing on the screen. The first one is making schooling relevant. And what that means is to really make sure that it aligns with the directions that families are engaging in while they go through the resettlement process. A lot of feedback that we've received from families from in FCSN during our community of practices discussions on how newcomer family engagement is going is that a lot of folks especially newcomer families that come together, really prioritize basic needs over schooling, rightfully so. But a lot of this time, basic needs in schooling are not seen as parallel resources. Schooling and understanding the school system, attending school and interacting with school professionals is a really great resource and way to get basic needs and get access to basic needs. So this is something that we have to think about and really keep in mind while we're working with our families. How do we make schooling relevant for folks? How do we think of ways in our districts? How do we think of personalized ways to create ways? I said ways a lot, but how do we create personalized ways to let families know that schooling is something that is not only relevant, but also extremely useful for family dynamics in this context? Um, Secondly, we want to acknowledge transnational connections and futures. And what that means is that oftentimes, as a couple of people in the chat have mentioned already, a lot of our students have multi-directional futures. We don't know if they're going to be resettling in our district. We don't know if they're going to be keeping on going in our school. And we don't know if they're going to stay in this country within this year or within the next 5. It's always very uncertain. This is something that definitely families keep in mind a lot. It definitely, as somebody that's gone through the process of preparing for multi-directional futures, it creates a lot of stress and it leads to a lot of challenges in communication. But acknowledging that this is something that families are going through not only validates that experience, but also affirms it not only for their community, but also for within our own school systems. A way to acknowledge transnational connections and futures may be to have one-on-one conversations with families, acknowledging that there may be several different paths that their family and their students can go down on, including ways that they may be redirected within their school districts, as a lot of folks have been experiencing so far. Another way to do so is to also prepare materials and learning materials in ways that are easily accessible in their primary and home languages so that folks have this information with them um, as they keep going perhaps to back to their home country, if they stay here, if they're going to another area. And another also realistic way of doing so is to make sure there are physical as well as technological paper trails to everything that we do. Perhaps folks that are moving from not within this district, but from school to school because of the ways that their shelters are dictating their ability to come into different schools may mean that they might not always have the best technology around them. But having a paper trail for information that we pass on to families can be critical for us because folks can keep the information physically and also access them through technology. So those are a couple of ways to acknowledge this connection and prepare for multi-directional futures. Thirdly, we come to the bullet point of fostering strong relationships. And this is really the basis of our conversation throughout all these 10 hours. But more importantly, I want to emphasize the importance of relational engagement. Engaging with folks in a way that really emphasizes not only the understanding of context of where they're coming from, for example, for kiddos that may not come with their parents and are being sponsored by another sponsored family in a district. But also, aside from that, remembering that it is important to utilize relational engagement in terms of how we partner with our communities, who we talk to, and why partnering with communities is important for the long haul. Our fourth and final bullet point on this list is recognizing and also utilizing community cultural wealth. We're going to be diving deeper into community cultural wealth in the next slide. I just wanted to point this out in this slide first because it is a very important direction for growth. And it really emphasizes different ways and addresses a framework for us to think about all the ways that we can think about family engagement for newcomer families with an asset-based mindset. Moving onwards, as I mentioned, let's talk about the community cultural wealth framework. Um, you can feel free, of course, to screenshot this if you want to look at this while we talk about the other context that we've prepared for today as well. But just to go through a definition of what community cultural wealth is, it is on the very right of your screen in the darker text box. An array of knowledge, skills, abilities, and contacts possessed and utilized by communities of color to survive and resist macro and micro forms of oppression. This is defined by Tara Yosso from 2005. Um, and this framework is also created by them. And I just think that it's a really great way to really frame our understanding of an asset-based mindset and what that looks like. I'm going to go through the couple of bullet points to the left and define them in terms of what types of cultural capital we can see from newcomer families coming in and how that relates back to the last milestone that we're explaining in the series, respecting language and culture. The first milestone, not the milestone, the first capital that I'd like to go through today is aspirational capital. And what this means is the ability to maintain hopes and dreams for the future, even in the face of real and perceived barriers. This is something that a lot of folks really oftentimes don't talk about too much in terms of the resettlement process, and before that the whole moving process that refugees and other newcomer families go through when they decide to resettle in Massachusetts. And really emphasizing that and affirming that is going to be really important for how we speak and frame our conversations for our newcomer families and also to other folks working with newcomer families. Secondly, in terms of linguistic capital, that includes the intellectual and social skills attained through communication experiences in more than just one language and or style. And what we mean by that is really, like we mentioned before, building and emphasizing the bilingual aspect of there's everybody's skill sets, really building on that relationship and seeing the multilingualness of our families as an asset and a way to really open up doors for communication with other communities and to create a broader look at how partnerships look like in the long term. Um, this is a really great way to bring in the term culturally sustainable, really capitalizing on the linguistic skills that our families have to offer. The third bullet point is familial capital. And what I mean by that is defining it as those cultural knowledges that are nurtured among family that carry the sense of community history, memory, and also of cultural interactions and intuition. So a lot of the times when we interact with newcomer families, they may come with their nuclear family, they may come alone, or they may already be coming into situations and families that have already been established within the states, and being embraced into the family existing here, but really utilizing this familial capital, understanding the cultural knowledge that families have to offer is really important also in terms of respecting culture. Next, we'll talk about social capital, and this can be understood as networks of people and community resources. So peers and social contacts can provide both instrumental and also really emotional support to navigate through society's institutions. We talk about this when we relate our newcomer work back to SEL, how we can really utilize our trainings in SEL to folks within the classroom and how they can bring that back to their families. The second to last bullet point is navigational capital. And this can be defined as skills of maneuvering through social institutions And by social institutions, what we're really emphasizing today is that a lot of these social institutions, as we know, are not usually created with communities of color in mind, much less communities of newcomers. So their ability to navigate um, the school system already in itself, and also being able to resettle. These are skills that we're trying to utilize and build on and to also attain. A lot of it is already there. It's really a matter of communication and also relationship building in order to really access the the to really access and maximize the capital that we're building on. Lastly, when we think of community cultural wealth as a framework, we also need to acknowledge the resistant capital that families come in with. This is defined as those knowledges and also skills that are fostered through oppositional behavior that challenges inequality. And this form of cultural wealth is grounded in the legacy of resistance to subordination exhibited by communities of color. And we really have to acknowledge, especially in understanding the context within how folks are, attempting to resettle into our systems, what that means for them and what sorts of resistance capital that they have demonstrated prior to the resettlement process here. Um, Both as individuals, as a family, and also as a community, and acknowledging that and knowing that that is there is going to be critical in terms of understanding how to speak and communicate to communities that we are attempting to partner with, going back to the other milestone that we talked about in the last session, and how that really relates back to the individual relationships that we build with our families. I'm going to stop here and pause for any questions or just comments that people have on the community cultural wealth framework. Okay, I think that was a couple of seconds, also from my water break, but I'm going to keep moving on from here if we don't have any questions yet, over to our more interactive element of our time here today. We're going to move into a discussion on trends, current trends that we're seeing, as well as strategies for classrooms, instructional designs that we've introduced in the prior session, so we can look at it a little bit more thoroughly. But we're going to break into the breakout rooms, talk about this before we go into another round of me speaking about the context that we're trying to build today. So I've been getting some feedback that utilizing the Jamboard may be a little difficult before, because folks may not understand what the full prompt is before we do the breakout rooms. So I'm gonna pause the recording, go into the Jamboard, show everybody what the prompts look like, and then break everybody out so that it's a little bit easier. Okay, see a thumbs up. Thank you. I appreciate it. Gonna stop recording. To end off our session today, I'm going to speak a little bit on utilizing strategies that we've mentioned both in the Jamboard and also outside of that, and also what that means in terms of seeking community partnerships so that we relate everything back to an intersectional view of the milestones in the belonging diagram. But we saw in the Jamboard that a couple of folks in districts are already utilizing different methods in terms of promoting inclusivity and family engagement in school districts, offering parent education workshops in the third bullet point, implementing culturally responsive teaching strategies in the fourth bullet point. And because of all of that work, and also thinking about how health impacts a really big portion of attendance, why folks come to school, why folks don't come to school, building partnerships with community organizations and agencies. What we haven't really talked about yet is the second bullet point, creating and connecting with PACs, as well as the last bullet point, creating spaces and opportunities to work with cultural brokers. Because of time constraints, we won't be talking about these too much, but I would also like to put the word out there right now that in April, we have two webinars coming up that talk more in detail and in depth about cultural brokering, what that means in terms of this context, and what it means generally to family engagement. The way to register is the same as how you got this link through FCSN's website that I will send to everybody again. But in May, we will be having two more webinars on packs as well. So the power of CPACs and LPACs within your school districts and what we can do to partner with them in terms of welcoming newcomer families. So stay tuned for all these topics in depth. They will, as well as the next one on Tuesday, be 2 hours long in terms of commitments. They are not eligible for PDPs because they are not a part of this 10-hour series, but they are here for you. So please feel free to invite anybody that you know that you feel like may benefit from this information as well. You will see on the next slide one last point that I wanted to make on cultural brokering and how it relates back to respecting language and culture. That cultural brokers are community members that receive extensive training on human service supports. So they are ideally, but not always, be of the same culture of the family, but will definitely have this extensive knowledge base of the family's culture. Um, so this can really mean anybody that has experience in the culture, and what I think a lot of folks tend to not really see or oversee is that newcomer families and communities can also be cultural brokers for you and your team. So really speaking to one newcomer family and forging a relationship, and in that forging relationship aspect of your work, having it be successful is a really great way to connect and reach out with other families. It doesn't have to be connecting with families one on one that we can forge relationships with the community as a whole. It really can be passed on just because parents and communities are so tight knit. So this is one last thought I'm going to leave everybody with today. We will speak more of this in a review on the next session on Tuesday, as well as our sessions in April more extensively on cultural brokering. So I'm looking forward to seeing you there. I am going to stop sharing the screen now so that we can get back to going back over here so we can get back to asynchronous work time. I will stay in this main room for folks to ask me any questions during this process. I'm going to stop recording now. Thank you for coming.